right.
All right, so I'm hoping everyone in this room already knows what Tatari is, but in case they don't, do you mind giving us the quick pitch?
Yeah, I'd love to, because as much as I would want people to know who we are, that's not always the case. So Tatari, in one sentence, we are technology for TV advertising. I know there's a lot of technology for TV advertising out there. I will, however, proudly say that still today, we are the only company, the only solution that covers not only CTV, but also the good old-fashioned linear TV, cable and broadcast. I know it's changing, but it's still 50 to 60% of the market today, depending on whether you look at it from a viewership or media volume. So our clients, they are typically brands. They are also agencies. The brands, they come in all shapes and sizes, I always say. We've got the very small brands, a modern bow, to the very big brands. For example, Chime, they recently went public. It could be a new brand. For example, we do the TV advertising for Starlink and Figma, but it could also be a traditional, not a legacy, but household American brand name like Terminix, Bridgestone, you name it. So what else should I say around this? Put it all in simple English. These companies, these brands and agencies, they will run their TV campaigns with us, soup to nuts, from creative management to planning, buying, measurement, in small doses, as little as $500 a week in a retargeting campaign, the whole way into the Super Bowl. We have 3 brands going to the Super Bowl next year. And so that's Tatari in a long nutshell. As much as it's all demand, we also have a component to the company which is very much supply side focused under the brand The Viewpoint, and then a technology solution around privacy and identity under the brand Vault. We do a lot.
Totally, exactly. When you say TV, you're talking about the whole swath of it all, and the amount of brands that you work with is impressive. We'll get into that supply side in a bit. But one thing ahead of this panel, I listened to, you were recently on an Ad Exchanger podcast, and one thing that I picked up on is you refer to Tatari's measurement as outcome measurement. I hear the word outcome all the time, and it seems like everyone has different definitions of it. How do you define outcome?
Yeah, and actually let's also look at the context and of history, because TV measurement traditionally, like as we know it by Nielsen, was always around audience measurement, right? The success of your campaign being defined by the extent to which you reach an audience. When we came to the scene 9 years ago, we focused on outcomes, the success being driven by the extent you can drive an action, being a visit to a website, an app install, a sale, but true actions, not like an intent to do something. And so, the brands and agencies that work with Tatari, if they go to our dashboard, they go in there on a next day basis. Actually, we're the only company who will do this on a next day basis. They will see what happened, whether it's streaming or linear, in an apples to apples comparison. Obviously, there's kind of maybe a question underneath it. How do we do it? Ultimately, it's a data and data science exercise. We bring together 2 sets of data. On the one hand, a lot of first-party data, the events that happen on a brand's website or in their apps or in the retail stores, and we compare or we marry that with the impressions data. And so you get metrics that look very digital in nature. We always say that we can bring an outcome measurement to the table that makes TV look more like digital and less than TV.
Well, speaking of how it works, I was at a couple weeks back, you had your big conference called Forward. You announced a lot of different product developments. A big part of that was building a future of TV that is centered around complementing programmatic with direct media execution. Why is that so important?
Yeah, and for us, it's actually more than complementing. It's kind of like what we lead with. From inception, we have always believed in direct media execution. I know that sounds a little awkward in a Programmatic I conference, but I'm going to say it anyway. And look, there's many reasons for that. There's many obvious reasons, and there's maybe some less obvious reasons. The obvious ones are the ones that we know about, we read about in the press. If there's no SSP, DSP, or other middlemen, then, well, there's a whole bunch of fees that go away, media dollars that get, put to work harder. Sometimes we see these ad tech tax being 100% of the media. And so we get rid of that, that's good. But in direct media execution, say we buy an impression from Disney, well, there's no risk of fraud. Disney will never sell us a fraudulent expression. Brand safety is also dealt with in one fell swoop. And we kind of know the Disney programming in which the ad will be placed. And so that's all cool. For what it's worth, Carrie, the publishers themselves, in my observation, they prefer it as well. They like to know who the buyer of the impression is, as opposed to being anonymously picked off by a DSP. So I think these are the reasons we know. The other less obvious reason, a little harder to explain, is really comes back to how supply in CTV is organized. I'll give the example with Tatari. We see that 90 to 91% of all impressions, streaming impressions, come from the top 10 publishers. And so that's a fact. And if we know that, why should we apply digital practices, or worse, digital technology like DSPs and the like, if supply is that concentrated? What we rather do, and what we've done since day one, is do direct technology integrations into the ad servers of those 10 publishers and take it from there. And so I think this is where the industry is copying us a little bit, right? Like 2-3 years ago, we saw OpenPath, clear lines, so many names, but yeah.
Well, I would love if you could elaborate on that. Like you just said, people don't necessarily like to name competitors, but as you noted, many companies are introducing that concept around TV. So I'm curious what you think is missing from the current approaches, especially in TV, that you guys are fulfilling when it comes to supply path optimization.
Yeah, there was actually, for people who were here before, there was a really good panel before. There was Katie from Magnite, and she actually gave a really honest answer to the kind of like, what is the tech? And she said, right, in SPO for CTV, it's not technology. And this is exactly what we see. At best, it's an existing header bidding solution. At worst, it's some commercial deal or a volume discount to existing PMP deals. So that's not how we see it. It's really, right, I think the other thing that came up in that panel was like, do we go from buyer DSP to brand or buyer SSP to brand? It's buyer straight into the ad from buyer straight into the ad server of the publisher. I messed up there a little bit. But so that's how we see it. There was a report by Analytics a month or two ago, and in that they referred to the Trade Desk OpenPath, which is the direct media solution, so to speak, suffering from 70% fraud. And look, I mean, I understand analytics is maybe a little controversial and we have to take it with a pinch of salt. That's all cool. But it's remarkable. It should be zero. It just shows that it still lives in the programmatic world, which is exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to say here.
That Magnite panel that you mentioned, one thing I think they said at the top that they didn't want to talk about AI. I feel the opposite. I feel like we must talk about AI. And one thing that, I've seen that there's, listening to panels like this, there's a lot of talk when it comes to the impact on creative execution. There's a lot of talk about data analysis. How do you think AI will help the operators that are really working in this industry? So I mean the planners, the buyers, the strategists.
Yep. I'll talk about planning and buying, but actually I don't want to dismiss the first points around creative or workflow automation. They're real, right? We have seen some Tatari brands come up with the most beautiful creatives that look like multi-million-dollar productions, and we find out later they were kind of conked together just like in a few hours and a few $100s. It's real and it's very exciting. Same with workflow automation. We especially see that on the agency side, where they mostly will use third-party tools, even ChatGPT or a Zapier agent, to make things run smoother and more efficient. So it's real. We definitely want to go a little beyond that. So in planning and buying, let me separate them. So in planning, but all of that data that I mentioned earlier for measurement, it also feeds into planning, right? Because it feeds into the optimization of the next campaign. The example here, right, and this is just a Tatari example, we sit on 8 years and billions of dollars of performance media. So if you sprinkle some basic machine learning on that, we can put TV plans together in a matter of seconds with deadly accuracy, and I hate to admit it, with better performance or outcomes than our human buyers can do. And by the way, that's not just for streaming TV, it's also for linear TV. And you can see this, right, how a traditional media buyer, he or she can never process 10,000 of buyable segments of cable or broadcast, and a computer can do it so much better. And so we call it media planning engine. At Tatari, we refer to the fact that we doubled our revenue in the last 2 years with the same amount of people. I mean, that's a cornerstone ingredient to all of that. So that's planning. Buying-wise, actually the piece that I'm most excited about, it's also the hardest to explain. This is where I not advocate, but where I kind of predict the death of the DSP, which is not a controversial thing, but I'll say it. Because running a DSP is very, very expensive. We have grown to the situation where maybe we have to run 10,000 price auctions per second to a point where we have to run hundreds of thousands of price auctions a second, QPS. And I mean, computationally, that's very, very expensive. And there's a better way, right? If we just look at the pool of impressions, and then we use that first-party data, and we use AI to help decide which impression is best suited for which brand, then we can skip the price auctions altogether and do it in a much more cheaper way, but equally efficient. So that's really what we're focused on, maybe less so on the creative side, and I hope the industry as a whole will go there.
I appreciate you getting deep on AI in all aspects of it. Another thing that I picked up at Forward, you talked about data clean rooms, which again, there's a lot of words written about that. Yep. But I'm curious about why did you launch that and how that's performing for you right now? Yeah,
I'd say we launched it for two reasons as a separate, completely kind of separated company from Tatari. It's called Vault. Reason one is we wanted not just to stay on top, but stay ahead of privacy and privacy standards and legislation, especially when we work with a lot of fintech and healthcare brands. And so Vault, Tatari doesn't use IP addresses anymore, as an example. It's all processed but involved, anonymized, checked, great. The other reason comes to the fact that when we look at the industry, I mean, the existing DCR solutions are good, but they're always function in isolation of a particular publisher. Brands need to see cross-publisher measurement, and so we needed a solution that can do that, and hence we took it on to launch Vault. And it's actually like, I think your question was also like, does it run well? Yeah. We haven't published on this. We had one brand. I mean, I forgot the exact percentage, it's embarrassing, but say they said like, look, we've got a 5 or 10% better result because we can measure better. From there, you can optimize better. And I'm sorry, I don't have the exact percentage.
No, well, when you're ready to share some numbers, please send them to my way and AdExchanger's way, obviously. Well, I think we have time for one last question, and so let's end on a little forward-looking note. I'm wondering how you define success in TV over the next 3 years.
Yeah, how's that for an easy one, huh?
All of TV, but obviously we're speaking to this audience.
I think the first one is, for me, and even it's a part that Tatari doesn't play in yet, it's around the use of AI in creative. I truly believe that, in time, and it might take a solid 5 years, but we'll get to a situation when we're watching the Super Bowl, let's say 100 million households, each of those 100 million households will get a different ad. Perfectly put together on the fly, perfectly suited for that household. I mean, that's incredible. That's incredibly exciting.
In 3 years, you think you can reach
that? I think 5 years, a little bit more. But you don't know. And then the other one is like, I'll just come back to what we practice religiously at Tatari is direct media execution. Because if we do that, as I said, more media dollars put to work, more performance, and I guess that's what brands want. Actually, not just brands, for the entire ecosystem. It's good for publishers as well, right? Because it's better yield management. So I think if we can nail those two things, I think we'll be good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time today. What a great conversation, and thank you, AdExchanger, for having us.
All right, thank you.